Well, hello everyone. This is Mr. Cuddill. I'm certainly excited because we're on to plants. Cellular respiration is a bear, as you know, and it's hard. And I don't know, that's fine. Mitochondria are great. Plants have mitochondria too, but plants. Sometimes I like plants more than I like people or even myself, especially my daughter. Just kidding. Anyway, we're just going to go over the first couple pages of this. We're not going to get into any gory detail today. There's really just two processes, and they're not that hard. Some of the themes that we saw in cellular respiration, we will re-see again. So therefore, it's a little bit easier, I think, than cellular respiration. So I just want you, during this unit, at some point on plants, to go to a plant and thank it. Whisper to it. You can breathe on it. Oh, plants love carbon dioxide. Rusty here sometimes is like my only friend. I feel kind of lonely up here. And this is like the 8th reincarnation, by the way, of Rusty. I've killed 7. Anyway, Rusty's here. Rusty shakes with excitement sometimes when I breathe on him. It's awesome. Let's start with a question. The dry weight of a tree, or even Rusty, comes primarily from what? What would you guess? I think the best way to talk about this is to start with a story. My wife and I have been to La Push, Washington, way up there in the northwest corner of our country a couple times, and the Quilette, I don't know how to say it correctly, tribe is up there, and they actually still have they've been there for over 1,000 years, and they still have a permit to harpoon whales. So I've never seen this, but apparently from the bluffs overlooking the ocean, sometimes you can see them out in whaling boats, and they're trying to harpoon the migrating humpback whales in between Alaska and Mexico. Pretty cool sight if you can see it. But there's something also that I found on the internet that happened at La Push, and it was this. This is a redwood tree that fell somewhere in the forest, went down a river or stream, went out to the ocean. And could you imagine hitting that with a boat? Or even, let's imagine if you had a car and you drove into that at 70 miles an hour, or if you were that person and you turn around and you hit that as hard as you can with your hand. Is that thing pretty solid? Where did all that mass come from? I really want you to think about this. We're going to watch a movie here.
Trees are some of the biggest organisms on the planet. But where do they get that matter to grow?
It's nutrient right? It's that soil, right? Yeah. Goodness out of the soil, I suppose.
Comes out of the soil.
Yeah. Goodness.
Why isn't there a big hole around the tree where it's taking out all the soil?
Because it doesn't say gradually, that the soil has time to recover.
I think it's intuitive to believe that the tree gets most of its mass from the soil, because you can see those roots digging into the soil, and they must be taking something out of there. And I mean, a tree looks like dirt, and it feels solid like dirt, but it's not. In the early 1600s, a scientist named Johann Baptista van Helmont tried to figure out where the mass of a tree was coming from. So he got a pot of soil and very carefully measured the amount of soil in there. Then he planted the tree and took care of it for 5 years, making sure that no soil left or was added to his pot. And at the end of this experiment, he weighed the tree to find that it was 72 kilograms, but the mass of soil had only decreased by about 60 grams. This was pretty strong evidence that the mass of the tree does not come from the soil.
I've never thought about that, actually. Because they don't really eat anything. Trees. They don't eat anything? Yeah. They don't eat anything. Water is all basic soil. That's all they eat? Yeah. They don't eat anything else? No. That's all they eat?
Well, presumably from the water and the nutrients from the soil.
Is there anything else that you need besides the soil and the water?
It's what it is, isn't it?
To make
other than the original seed. For that particular tree.
the seed and the soil and the water, and that makes this big tree.
Of course, Johann Baptista van Helmont did conclude that the tree was made entirely of water. Now, while that's not correct, at least he was on the right track, realizing that the matter of a tree doesn't come out of the soil.
The sun energy, yeah.
The sun energy.
Yeah.
Are they converting energy into mass, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there wasn't stuff, and then there was. Like, where did that stuff come from?
I have no idea.
My question is, where do they get that mass to grow big?
Sun. Is it from the rain? And the sun, presumably, right? Sunlight.
And the sunshine.
The sunshine? Does the sunshine add mass to the tree?
Well, yes, it wouldn't. They wouldn't grow without it. I don't know whether it adds mass, but they wouldn't grow without it.
Of course, the sun's energy is needed for the tree to build the matter into its branches and leaves. But the sun itself, the energy is not matter.
I suppose we've got to put air into this as well. Yeah, there's got to be something out of the,
What is
a
it
gas,
about
a gas in the air that it needs as well.
Oxygen.
the trees need the oxygen?
And I guess oxygen.
The oxygen, of course.
The oxygen? Are there any ingredients that we're missing?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide.
So would it surprise you to find out that 95% of a tree is actually from carbon dioxide? Trees are largely made up of air.
Yeah.
I need distraction. Like, oh, come on. So as it turns out, trees are mostly made out of air, out of the carbon dioxide that they take in. What's interesting is that we breathe out carbon dioxide and water. That's how we lose mass. But it's the exact same substances that trees breathe in to gain mass. So if you can imagine a closed system where it was just you and a tree, you would breathe out that carbon dioxide and water, the tree would take it in, so you would get smaller while the tree is getting bigger. And in a sense, you're becoming the tree.
Yes. So what is the answer here? Say it out loud with me. Air. Basically carbon dioxide, which is about 1% of the air that you inhale. It's 78% nitrogen gas, 21% oxygen gas, 1% CO2. And trees bring that in, and that's where the carbon comes from to build this glucose molecule. You know, I told you earlier in this class that chloroplasts create about 1 billion pounds of glucose per second on our planet. It's the enzyme that facilitates the dark reaction, which creates this, is the most prevalent enzyme, Rubisco, on the planet Earth. So it's pretty cool. Be amazed about what you're about to see when it comes to plants. Again, we're only going to talk about 10.1 here. I want you to understand that plants do photosynthesis, but there's many other things. You can see an alga up there in the top left corner, of protists. They sometimes do photosynthesis. Some prokaryotic bacteria like cyanobacteria do it. In fact, they are responsible for changing our atmosphere over the course of a few 100 million years, a long, long time ago, from an oxygen devoid atmosphere to an oxygen rich one. And then that allowed eukaryotic cells to evolve and for us to get higher organisms. It's pretty cool. However, there are other higher organisms like plankton that do photosynthesis. Yes, plankton. Plankton is made of eukaryotic cells. This character also is made up of eukaryotic cells, and it's pretty cool that this thing can do photosynthesis. It is, of course, an oriental hornet does photosynthesis. I want you to understand that. This thing takes in water, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, a little light energy, with some appropriate enzymes, it's able to make glucose. I think it's pretty cool. So it doesn't need to eat as much as it ordinarily would. Well, here's some examples of these bacteria, and these are autotrophs. And what that means is auto means self, troph means food. Essentially, these things make their own food. And then there are organisms that use sunlight also to make their own food. The examples I just showed you were ones that used like sulfur or these gases that exist maybe at the bottom of the ocean. But a plant is an example of something that is a photoautotroph. That means it uses light to make its own food. Pretty cool. Or these organic molecules called glucose. And then organisms called heterotrophs, which means other food. These guys are the consumers. They're going to harvest the things that have made their own food, such as these types of bacteria and plants and stuff like that. So here we are on concept 10.1. Here's the title of it. It says photosynthesis converts light energy, chemical energy of food. Remember, what these guys do is they take all these atoms from water and carbon dioxide, and then they take the light energy and they're going to kind of rearrange all the atoms so it looks like this in a glucose molecule and put light energy right here at these bonds. So we'll get to some of this detail, which kind of looks like this picture, in just a moment. But first, let's get down to the basics. Remember, water comes up from the soil, up the trunk, out the stems to the leaves. It's one of the reactants of, if we go from right to left here, of photosynthesis. It also needs carbon dioxide that comes through these little holes called the stomata on the underside of the leaves. And then light will hit maybe the top of this leaf. So those are the three reactants that occur here, or sorry, that are needed in order to do photosynthesis. And then the products would be glucose, which I just showed you a stick model of, and oxygen gas. And oxygen gas is released out of these stomata, also out into the environment. So if you ever go into our greenhouse, or you put your nose up close to, I'm pointing over here because that's where usually Rusty is, underneath a live plant, you will get pure oxygen coming out of there. In fact, for a normal sized leaf, let's call this a normal sized leaf, how much oxygen per minute do you think that they create? Pure O2, put it out into the atmosphere, and the answer is about 5 milliliters, which is about half of this graduated sun. It's pretty cool, per minute. That's a lot. If you go into the greenhouse, take big, deep breaths. But of course, that's not the only thing they suck up out of the ground. They suck up nutrients, and they suck up other things like gold. In fact, some gold prospectors have these machines where they take a leaf off of a tree and they put this kind of a electromagnetic spectrum radiation on it. And I'll show you that in a second. And they actually look for gold in the veins, because sometimes that's taken up accidentally out of the ground, and then they know to actually kill that tree so they can mine right underneath it. Isn't that awesome? Well, chloroplasts are these organelles that science believes actually once were free living. There's a few reasons why. Number one is that they have two membranes. And so what they think is that it had a singular membrane at one time. It was enveloped by phagocytosis into a cell, and then it got a second membrane, and it's been that way forever. It also has its own DNA, just like mitochondria do. And I think that's pretty cool. And the question is, why would it have its own DNA? It's just part of a bigger eukaryotic cell, and the nucleus has got that under control, the whole transcription translation thing. And I think the answer is because it had to make its own proteins at one time. So maybe it was once free living, and basically it's just a powerhouse. It's going to use light energy and some gases and a little water to make some chemical potential energy molecules, which are these glucose molecules. Pretty cool. Well, there's a lot of information in your book, and I've told you on our learning management platform what to read, but we're going to read this also, and this is kind of a level that I'm interested in knowing as far as the big picture is concerned. Again, if you were in class, I would have someone read this top left corner. It says, in higher plants, photosynthesis occurs in leaves. Water taken in by roots passes up the stem through the leaf veins into the cells. Photosynthetic cells, which contain chloroplasts, are sandwiched between the upper and lower epidermis. Stomata emit CO2 needed for photosynthesis and permit the byproduct O2 to leave. Water vapor accidentally also escapes by this route. You can see that kind of in the picture here in the middle. And then if you go up to the top right corner of the slide or this handout, why don't you circle the palisade and spongy layer cells? Those are types of cells that exist at the top of the leaf, and those are the ones where most of the chloroplasts reside to do photosynthesis. If you go down below that, you'll see example of a single cell, and you can see all along the left side there's like 4 chloroplasts. You can also see a nucleus and a water-containing vacuole. And if you look at the chloroplasts, I'm now down here in the middle of the page, or at the bottom of the picture on the screen, you can see here, and this is important, that there are these thylakoids, and these are these green discs that do the light reaction of photosynthesis. A big stack of these is called a granum. You can see that here. And then there's a solution that surrounds all of the thylakoids within the chloroplast. That's called the stroma. That's just a solution. You can see right down here, or at the top right corner of this picture on the slide, it's a stroma where carbohydrates are made from CO2 and the energy produced in the thylakoid membrane. We'll get to this in just a moment. a little more detail, but I want to keep breaking it down. So if you then did a cross section of one of these coins or these thylakoids that do the light reaction of photosynthesis, you'll see something at the bottom there that looks kind of familiar. Isn't that crazy? You know what's awesome with evolution is that when nature figures out something that works, it doesn't go reinvent itself if it doesn't have to. Have you seen kind of double phospholipid bilayer, an H+ reservoir, maybe some electrons are going to go through those proteins embedded in the bilayer there? Have you seen an ATP synthetase enzyme before? Isn't it cool? We've seen these things, and that's what kind of makes this a little bit easier. And you're going to get a reservoir of H+ ions, and they're going to go through and spin the thing, and it's going to phosphorylate ADP, which tells me that that whole process was developed evolutionarily so long ago in the tree of life that it actually now has bifurcated into both chloroplasts, which create potential energy from light, and then mitochondria, which break down that potential energy that's created in the chloroplast. But this whole process of these proteins embedded in the membrane must have evolved even before those guys split off evolutionarily as far as lineage goes from one another through speciation. It's pretty cool. Well, I'm going to show you one more basic movie, and then we'll get to a little bit more detail here. I show you this picture because my colleague, Mr. Frankel, call him Dr. Frankel, he loves it. He loves to wear maroon in the fall, and I think it's just the color of fall. Some days there are 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 people wearing it all in this hallway at one time. Try to look for these terms in this movie.
If you want to know how a plant grows, it takes water, air, and sunlight, and makes cellulose. Every plant can do this fundamental process, and we can call this photosynthesis. Unlike me and you, plants need CO2, and they make oxygen that stops us turning blue. Every plant can do this fundamental process, and we can call this photosynthesis. It's a miracle how all the chlorophyll catches sunlight in the leaves of the plants and the trees.
Yay, okay, before we press pause, I want to fill you in on one last thing. So if we have a chloroplast here, and we have these thylakoids in a stack called grana, where the light reaction of photosynthesis is going to occur, there's 2 reactions I hope you're gathering here, light and dark reactions. Chlorophyll molecules are the things that are going to capture the light. The light reaction, I have it written, I just don't want to screw up here. So I'm going to say that a reactant in the light reaction is light. I'm not going to put a product down for this. Something else that the light reaction needs is water, or H2O. In the light reaction, I'm going to write here diffuse. So the oxygen that exists, the oxygen atom that exists in a water molecule will get together with another oxygen atom and diffuse out of the chloroplast as oxygen gas. That's a product of photosynthesis if we're going from right to left up there. And water is a reactant. So we've kind of accounted for water, but we haven't accounted for this, and I'll get to that in a second. Another reactant in photosynthesis is this thing called NADP+. So it differs obviously from the NAD that you've seen before in cellular respiration, and the way that it differs is with a P. And so I just remember NADP is the one that's used in photosynthesis. And then eventually this thing, here's the NADP, and then I'm going to write H here. It will grab onto this hydrogen atom, I just put an arrow here, that was once in water, and it's going to take it to the dark reaction. So these products are going to be used over here in the dark reaction, and we'll get to all this detail later. The last thing that happens in the light reaction is that you have an ADP plus a phosphate. We've seen this song and dance before, and it is phosphorylated. That just says ATP to make ATP. Well, in the dark reaction, what happens is the carbon dioxide that is inhaled into the leaf through the little hole called the stoma or stomata It is then turned into, that's supposed to be an arrow, C6H12O6. Now you can see here, there's carbons and oxygens. It's probably used here. I'm going to circle this. This hydrogen atom that was once in water carried to the dark reaction as a result of becoming a product in the light reaction and carried by this electron carrier again, this NADP+. It's going to be carried over here, and what a surprise. It's going to be the hydrogen atoms that go into the glucose that then is produced through the dark reaction. So that's the big picture. What I'd like you to do is press pause, talk yourself through this for 2 or 3 minutes, and then talk yourself through these learning targets for a couple minutes, and then we'll just get to light, and then we'll be done.
Ever wonder where most of the food you eat every day comes from? Well, about 60% of the food you eat is carbohydrates. As you can probably tell from its name, carbohydrates contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But where do these atoms originally come from, and how do they join together to make delicious foods like fruits and pasta? It actually all starts with the air you are exhaling at this very minute, specifically the carbon dioxide molecules. Plants are going to breathe in this very same carbon dioxide through pores in their skin called stomata. Plants drink in water from their roots to get the needed oxygen and hydrogen atoms and their electrons in order to build carbohydrates. What is that thing? Well, that's a special plant organelle inside the leaves of plants called a chloroplast. It's green because of a special light-absorbing pigment called chlorophyll. Each leaf has about 44,000 cells, and every cell can have anywhere between 20 to 100 chloroplasts. That's up to 4,400,000 chloroplasts. By now, you've probably guessed that we're talking about the process of photosynthesis, and you might be wondering when the sun is going to make its entrance. Let's go back to that original molecule of water. The plant has to split this molecule of water so that it can get electrons from it. But the plant can't pull that water apart by itself. It needs help from the high energy rays of the sun. So now that the chloroplast has all the building blocks, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons, it can use them to go through the rest of the steps of photosynthesis to transform that original carbon dioxide gas into a simple carbohydrate called glucose, C6H12O6. That little glucose molecule then helps to build bigger and better carbohydrates like cellulose. Cellulose is a type of carbohydrate found in plants that our body cannot break down. We call it fiber, and we eat it in vegetables like lettuce, broccoli, and celery. Plants use cellulose to keep themselves strong. The plant could also turn that glucose into starch, a large molecule that stores energy for the plant. We love eating starch from plants like potatoes, corn, and rice. So you see, when we eat plants, we're actually benefiting from photosynthesis. The plant makes things like starch, which we eat, and then break back down into glucose, the first form the plant made. Then, the mitochondria in our cells, powered by the oxygen we breathe, can turn glucose into pure energy molecules called ATP. ATP powers all work done by each and every one of your cells, things like communication, movement, and transport. But why do we have to turn that glucose into ATP? Well, think of it like this. You're excited to start your summer job at the local ice cream stand, but your boss has just told you that she is going to pay you in ice cream cones. What are you going to be able to do with those ice cream cones? Nothing, which is why you kindly ask to be paid in dollars. ATP is just like dollars. It is the currency that all cells of life use. While glucose is, well, kind of like ice cream. Even plants have mitochondria in their cells to break down the glucose they make into ATP. So as you can see, humans and plants are intricately connected. The air we breathe out is used by plants to make the carbohydrates we enjoy so much. And in the process, they are releasing the very same oxygen molecules we need to breathe in order that our mitochondria can break down our delicious carbohydrate meal.
Isn't it cool how it's all layering on top of each other? Any good class, or we just follow the textbook. Any well-organized class that you have in any discipline when you go to college will do this. It will start small, it's simple, and all these layers like a cake will start layering on top of each other, and soon you'll be at the top with the icing. I think it's cool. Anyway, I like the way biology is structured. Do you know how many of these chloroplasts, these big things here, there are per square millimeter. Now, a millimeter is pretty small. I would say it's smaller than your pinky, like the, I guess, surface area of your pinky. How many chloroplasts per square millimeter on average? 500,000, 500,000. It's pretty crazy. Concept 10.2 talks about light and waves, and that's all we're going to talk about, and then we're done. There's just one more picture, there's one more handout, and then we're done. The light reactions convert solar energy, chemical energy of ATP and NADPH, which then flow to the dark reaction and help fix this CO2 and the hydrogen atom from here and create that glucose. We'll get to that the next time I talk to you. So what is light? Light has no mass, it takes up no space, meaning it doesn't have weight in the presence of gravity. What is it? Well, it's a form of electromagnetic energy traveling in rhythmic waves called photons. Did that help? Well, probably not. Maybe this will.
Yo, Spark, you got a flashlight?
Yeah, here it is.
Light, light, it scares away the fright. Soothing incandescence in the middle of the night. No more bed at sunset, much to our delight. You know we all adore it, but what the heck is light? Look at the electrons all happy in their shells, zipping right along, their life is pretty swell. Each one has their own amount of certain energy, and they will stay forever if you let them be. Just leave it all alone. But if you kick an atom squarely in the pants, electrons get excited and they'll do their special dance. Some absorb the energy and move to higher shells, and leave behind black pieces in spots that they once dwell. What goes up must then come down, it's not a silly piece. Electrons fall back down, extra energy release. Whatever made them to proceed in their upward stride. When they give off energy, it's in the form of light. The farther that they fall, the more power has the light. The shorter is the wavelength, the waves will be past light. The higher is the frequency of wavelengths that will pass. Light is made of photons, which have no charge or mass. Light, light, it rises with its might. Phosphorescent stars in the middle of the night. Ceiling constellations, no sure delight.
Okay, sorry. It's going to get worse in just a second. But don't you love it when the hippies make music? Okay, we got to talk about wavelength, because all types of energy that exist come in waves, essentially. And what a wavelength is it's measuring either from trough to trough or from peak to peak on an energy wave. Now, this is important because it will tell you how frequent the wave, how much energy the wave has, and that's due to the frequency of how quickly a wavelength will go through, say, a spot in geography, and how quickly that happens. We'll get to that detail in just a second, but first.
Energy moves in waves. Wavelengths grow so long before my eyes. Look like curves drawn on a page. Amplitude describes a wave's height, like a tower in the city. But don't, forget shape, 'cause all waves have the same. Yeah. Ooh, energy moves in waves. When the sound waves of gamma rays.
You know, people ask me what I do in June, and quite often I'm looking for science music videos, and my wife will say, "Hey, come take a hike with me," and I'll say, "No, thanks, honey. I'm looking for science music videos." Anyway, isn't that awesome? Trade places with me. Let's look at this handout that you have right here, and specifically, let's look across the top here. And what I want you to gather from this, way up in the top left corner of your slide, is that there are certain waves that are high energy, high frequency, which means that they undulate more rapidly than other waves on the right side of this increasing energy kind of graphic going from left to right, but also they will go, their wave, their say top and top will go through a point in geography more quickly than other waves over to the right. This is called having a short wavelength. These are indicative of things like gamma rays. I'm just looking across here, X-rays, UV light, these things that aren't that great to have hit us because they're just high energy waves and they can damage things like cells and mutate DNA as a result of changing nucleotides and so on. And then if you keep going past where there's the visible light there, you can see infrared, microwaves, radio waves. I once read about this U.S. Navy installation in Idaho, which you wouldn't think there'd be a naval base in Idaho. And they basically deal with communications between all these subs around the world, and they have very low frequency wavelengths. Some of these wavelengths can be like a mile long from trough to trough. Otherwise, they're super tight over there on the left side, 0.001 of a nanometer. And a nanometer is like way, way smaller. I forgot if it's 10 to the negative 6 or 10 to the negative 9th of a meter. So it's super small. Anyway, let's learn a little bit more about this electromagnetic spectrum from Emerson and Wong.
Electromagnetic spectrum is just a name for the range of radiation. Let me tell you what they are. Radio waves, microwaves, infrared radiation, not provide X-rays, gamma rays. From the TV station to your living room, that is the work of radio waves. Heating food in just seconds, microwaves do that.
Sorry, I can't take it anymore. You can see the whole music video. I've posted it. Sorry, that's the last one. So let's read down here, and then we'll be done. We just got to learn about light. It says, A, our eyes can detect light with wavelengths of about 400 to 750 nanometers. I don't know why we've evolved to be able to see this. Other animals can see UV radiation, or some can see infrared. We have just this range of these waves. You have to understand they're coming through the air here, and they just are at a certain wavelength between their peak and peak. And for some reason, we've evolved to be able to see that. I don't know why. And they're different colors. The Roy G. Biv that you see going from left to right here on the screen, it's pretty cool. This is why light in this range is called visible light. Wavelengths just short of the visible light are called UV light. Even shorter are X-rays, which overlap with ultraviolet and gamma rays, and then gamma rays. Wavelengths on the longer side of the visible spectrum are known as infrared, then microwaves, and radio waves. Then if you look down there at the bottom, it says, different types of chlorophyll are adapted to absorb specific wavelengths of light. Chlorophyll A occurs in all photosynthetic plants, protists and cyanobacteria. Chlorophyll B is found in all land plants and some algae. Chlorophyll C occurs in some other algae. And you can see what they're trying to show you there is that certain chloroplasts absorb certain wavelengths of light, and then those correspond to certain colors. So let's dive into this a little bit more. This is called the absorption spectrum. You're going to see this in your textbook. Basically, what they're saying is that chloroplasts like to absorb waves of different wavelengths. Now, what is the wavelength of light that chloroplasts in this plant don't like to absorb? And of course, the answer is green. That's the, at whatever wavelength that is, let's say 530 nanometers of energy, it's a wavelength of that energy. For some reason, it's being reflected off here. We see this plant as green because that's the only thing that isn't being absorbed. Just like this shirt has been kind of dipped in a dye, probably, which came from a plant, and that dye absorbed all different colors except for blue. And so then we see this striping as blue because that's what's being reflected off there. Wavelengths not absorbed are reflected or transmitted. You can see that. Chlorophyll A is the main photosynthetic pigment. You can find it on this kind of graph in the upper right-hand corner there. And it suggests that it likes to absorb wavelengths of light which correspond to violets, blues, and reds. Those are the things then that are inside these chlorophyll molecules that are absorbing this light and then trying to do the light reaction of photosynthesis. Well, there's also some other types of chlorophyll molecules called carotenoids, and these things absorb other wavelengths of light. And you can imagine, if you look at what carotenoids, if you look at that graph right there, and you see what carotenoids like to absorb, they like to absorb the purples, the blues, the greens. And so what do they allow to be reflected? Well, you can see the oranges and reds, and that's where the term carrot comes from, I think. But also, carotenoids exist in leaves which have lost their other photosynthetic pigments. What happens in the fall is that the angle of incidence of light, and then it's colder nights and stuff, and the plants like that, let's say aspens around here, start to say, well, it's becoming inefficient for us to do photosynthesis all the time. So we're going to like shut down the production of chlorophylls A and B. We're just going to let these carotenoids exist, and they're going to, for the last week or two of our deciduous leaf life before it falls to the ground, we're going to get some protective, function out of them, but also they're going to do some photosynthesis. They're going to absorb those blues and stuff and purples. And what we then see reflected back are these beautiful colors around here in the high country. It's pretty cool. Here's our last picture. This is what a chlorophyll molecule looks like up here on the top of the chloroplast. You can see way up at the top there that the only difference between chlorophylls A and B is one functional group, which is pretty amazing. And then that allows them to absorb light of different wavelengths. I think that's pretty amazing. It's a pretty big structure here. Let me show you what it looks like.
The chlorophyll molecule is like a rubber band. It can absorb the shock of a photon and stretch, holding the energy for a brief moment in time until it finally releases it at a lower level that can be captured by another molecule and ultimately converted into a chemical form.
I think that was supposed to be a catcher's mitt. Let's try this again.
The chlorophyll molecule is like a rubber band. It can absorb the shock of a photon and stretch, holding the energy for a brief moment in time until it finally releases it at a lower level that can be captured by another molecule and ultimately converted into a chemical form.
Thanks, everybody. We'll get to 10.2 the next time I talk to you.